in 1989, 1991. While England was raving, I was going back to when England was dreaming. And I have to say that it seems to be something that England keeps on doing, because of course England is dreaming at the present. And I am going to go on about this because it's a very, very serious matter. But it's amazing how this book climaxes with the Sex Pistols boat trip in the summer of 1977, which is when the Sex Pistols took a boat on the River Thames to protest about Queen Elizabeth's Silver Jubilee, because it seemed to me and a lot of other people involved with punk rock that this was a rotten lie, it was a nostalgic nonsense, it was getting in the way of what England could be in the future, and was a lie about what England was.
How do I see the youth today? I think that each generation has its own task and its own time. So I was born in 1953, so my task and the task of my generation was to deal with the aftermath of the war, the Second World War, to deal with everything that had been repressed, and also to live through what can now be seen as the golden age of mass culture, consumer culture, which is now coming to an end. As far as the youth of today is concerned, I think the issues they have to grapple with are to do with the possible end of consumerism. The way that we live now is obviously not sustainable into the next 50 years. They have to deal with climate change, and they have to deal with people's reaction to those two extremely important issues. And at the moment, a lot of people are reacting in a very fearful and angry and irrational way. We're seeing a lot of politics that are driven by people's feelings. And the young people who are the hope of the future, who are the future, have to really get beyond that if our current civilization is going to remain, and in fact if humanity is going to remain. So it's pretty serious. But then it's always serious for each generation. When I was growing up, the big fear was being blown up in a nuclear war. That's receded a little bit. It's still there, thanks to Trump and the ridiculous North Koreans. But the main thing is climate change and also the end of democratic consumerism.
I wouldn't want it to come back. You know, in my mind, it's historical, this particular form of London punk. And I think that the times have changed. And going back to my comments about science fiction, it's very strange to grow older. I'm now in my early 60s, and find that you're living in the science fiction future that was prophesied when you were young. And there were many aspects of punk that prophesied the future that we now live in, which is the media saturation and the speed of the media.
I think that the internet is having, obviously, a very big effect. What I hear from the young people that I talk to is that it's great to be able to get all this information, but there's almost too much. And if you want to write a magazine, if you want to make a statement, how do you make an impact? Because there's so much out there. So the problem is the reverse of what it was when I was young, which was scarcity. There just wasn't much stuff. You really had to hunt hard to find the stuff you wanted. Now you can find anything you want, but there's almost too much. It's still giving the power to very large corporations who seem to have very few ethics or very few morals. And I see that in my own work. I'm a writer and a broadcaster and a filmmaker. I'm a content provider. And content providers are really a long way down the list of people who get paid. And so there's a new model. There's a pyramid, which is like the whole of society, which is the top 1% get everything, and the other 99% scrabble around for the crumbs. And the internet, and the way that the internet is funded, Facebook, Google, etc., Amazon, etc., is very much a part of that.
So they were like a living collage of past youth cultures. A bit of mod from the 60s, bit of Teddy Boy, bit of Zoot Suit from the 40s, bit of this, bit of that. And I remember thinking, wow, there's actually a history of youth culture, and these kids are putting it all together and making something new out of it. So I started researching the history of youth culture, and I didn't realize at that time that this is something that McLaren and Westwood, Malcolm McLaren and Vivian Westwood, had done in their shop at 430 Kings Road.
As far as culture is concerned, as far as youth culture is concerned, the problem that exists is that there has been a concerted attack against the youth culture of the 60s because of its uncontrollable nature, to some extent, because of its radical qualities for the last 30 years. And there are all structural changes, certainly in Britain, that mean the young people are very underprivileged. They're not valued at all by our government in terms of youth employment, in terms of benefits, in terms of very much that is going to help them make their way in the world. And that's what young people need. They need assistance. I don't mean state assistance, but they need help from adults to make their way in the world. It seems to me to be obvious. Certainly my speciality is music. There certainly is a lot of interesting music being made. Music is a wonderful form of communication. It's never going to stop being a wonderful form of communication. It's very little niches. And so the days when you used to get something that was really exciting, full of content, that was radical, in the mainstream now seems to have disappeared. I don't know whether that will change or not. But it's also to do with the way now, the algorithms, the way that people consume music, the involvement of big companies, Spotify, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It all seems to me to diffuse the power of music. And the other thing that's diffused the power of music is the idea that music should be for free. Now, as a content provider, as a filmmaker and a writer, I disapprove of this. Our musicians should get paid. It's terribly simple. And if you don't pay for music, that means you don't really value it. And if you don't value it, it's just part of everything else. It's part of all of that that's going on outside. It's not anything different. And that's a real problem. That means that new artists find it very, very hard to get going. They can do it, but it's more difficult.
I have to say, although I'm officially, I live in the United Kingdom, I'm extremely ashamed of my country at the minute, and you'll note that I'm wearing a I voted Remain badge. So I want to be in Europe, unlike our lunatic politicians.
Brexit is a total and complete disaster, okay? There's very little more to be said about it. It's really, really dreadful. It's a huge national mistake. I can't believe what people are thinking. I obviously voted to remain in Europe. I want to remain in Europe. I like traveling to Europe. I like Europe. I love the idea of Europe. I know it's not perfect, but we should be in. What has happened in Britain is an extreme right-wing coup. It's not democratic. The impact on pop culture, it's hard to say. To be honest, I'm not really thinking about it. I'm thinking about stopping it.
Within a couple of months, I saw the Sex Pistols, and then the Clash, and then the Damned, and became fully involved in what became known as punk rock. Shortly after then, I started writing for a music paper in the UK called Sounds, and it was bought by about 150,000 people a week, and probably read by another 6 or 7 people. Each issue was read by about 6 or 7 people, so it reached about a million young people every week. And the NME, who was one of the rival papers, New Musical Express, reached even more. So it was a very exciting time to be a journalist, and I was thrust in the middle of that turmoil that you see.
Well, firstly, I'm not the official biographer of punk. I personally wrote a very good book about it, and people seem to like it, and so they take it seriously, and so they call me that, but I'm not. Political correctness to me is a very problematic term, because to me it's a term that's been used by the right wing over the last 20 years to shut down discussion of all the freedoms that I believe in: feminism, gay rights, civil rights for black people, etc., etc., etc. So I don't think there is a climate of political correctness. As far as punk rock is concerned, in terms of that, I don't see that anybody's stopping people saying what they want to say. If you want to say something very bad against a woman or a gay person or a black person, then you actually just shouldn't do it. That's what political correctness is about. It's saying you should not do that because it's bloody rude. And it's also not taking into account power relations. If you're a white, straight man saying that stuff, you're automatically more powerful than any of the minorities, so it's just insulting and bullying. As far as punk rock is concerned, then I'm not really the person to ask because I'm not following punk rock now. Punk rock for me, my involvement with punk rock was 40 years ago. I know that it still exists. I'm very happy that it still exists. I hope that it's a vital form, but that's really for young people to decide and also to discuss.